In this video, we're diving into incredible medieval enigmas that have recently been unraveled, revealing truths that completely change how we see the past. But before we begin, if you love calm, fascinating history content like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. And I'd love to hear from you. What's a historical mystery that's always intrigued you? Let me know down in the comments. Now, settle in, and let's uncover the medieval mysteries that are finally giving up their secrets. What if some of the greatest mysteries of the medieval world weren't mysteries anymore? For centuries, historians have puzzled over lost identities, strange events, and unexplained secrets buried deep in the Middle Ages. But today, thanks to modern science, archaeology, and a little bit of detective work, some of those mysteries have finally been solved. It is late, and the kind of late where the world feels softer, quieter, like everything is holding its breath. Imagine a dim room, stone walls, a single candle flickering on a wooden table. The flame bends and dances, throwing shadows that stretch and shrink like they have a mind of their own. Somewhere in that room, there is a book. Its pages are worn. The ink has faded. The edges are rough, like they've been turned by hands long gone. Maybe a monk sat here once, maybe a scholar, maybe someone who never imagined their words would survive this long, for a very long time. People believed this world this time was dark, not just dimly lit by candles, but dark in knowledge, dark in progress, dark in thought. We even gave it a name. The Dark Ages. It sounds dramatic, almost a little scary, like nothing good could possibly exist there. But here's the strange thing. That idea might be completely wrong. In fact, historians today don't even like using that term anymore. It oversimplifies things, makes an entire era feel empty, like nothing important happened between the fall of Rome and the rise of the Renaissance. But that's not true at all. Because while castles stood tall and wars were fought, something else was happening too. Quietly, carefully, people were writing, studying, observing the stars, recording diseases, building machines, passing down knowledge in ways that were fragile but powerful. The medieval world wasn't dark, it was hidden, and for centuries, much of it stayed that way. Not because people wanted it to be mysterious, but because time has a way of burying things. Pages get lost, stories get twisted, evidence fades, and sometimes entire truths disappear. Or at least, they used to, because now something has changed. We live in a time where the past is no longer silent. Today, historians and scientists are doing something that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. They are reopening these old mysteries, and not just guessing, solving them with tools that feel almost futuristic. Take DNA analysis, for example. Tiny fragments of genetic material pulled from bones that have been buried for hundreds of years. These fragments can tell us who someone was, where they came from, sometimes even how they died. It's like listening to whispers from the dead. Then there's archaeology, but not the old version, with just shovels and brushes. Now we have ground-penetrating radar, 3D scanning, chemical analysis that can detect traces of things long gone, like what people ate or what materials they touched. Even ink on a page can be studied to reveal secrets. And then there's something even more unexpected. Artificial intelligence. Yes, even machines are helping us read the past now. Old texts, that were once impossible to decode are being analyzed by algorithms. Patterns are being found. Languages are being reconstructed. Meanings slowly coming into focus. It's almost like the past is waking up. And as it does, something strange happens. Mysteries that once felt unsolvable begin to crack. Stories we thought we understood start to change. And sometimes, the truth turns out to be far more interesting than the myth. Because myths tend to simplify things. They make stories cleaner, easier to tell. But the truth is messy. It has layers, contradictions, surprises, and that's exactly what we're exploring tonight. Not just medieval history, but medieval mysteries. The kind that kept historians guessing for generations. The kind that sparked theories, arguments, even conspiracies. And now, one by one, they are being re-examined, reopened, and in many cases, solved. Some of these mysteries involve kings and lost heirs. Others involve entire villages that vanished without a trace. There are strange manuscripts no one could read, until now. Stories of people behaving in ways that seem almost impossible. And behind each one, there is a question, a gap in history. A moment where something didn't quite make sense. Until recently. Now, we are beginning to see those gaps. Fill in. But here's the interesting part. Even when we solve a mystery, it doesn't always feel like the end. Sometimes, the answer creates new questions. Sometimes, it changes how we see everything that came before it. And sometimes, it makes the story even stranger. So as we move through these chapters, think of this less like a history lesson and more like a quiet investigation. We're not rushing. We're not forcing answers. We're just following the clues. Piece by piece, story by story, letting the past speak in its own time. Because the medieval world was never truly silent. We just didn't know how to listen until now. And tonight, we begin. We begin with shadows in a tower, where two young princes were last seen. A place of stone walls, locked doors, and a mystery that refused to fade. For centuries, people have asked the same question. What really happened to them? And now, we might finally be getting an answer. But before we go there, just take a moment. Let the candle burn a little lower. Let the quiet settle in. Because the deeper we go into history, the more it starts to feel like it's not as far away as we thought. And some stories have been waiting a very long time to be told. The tower stands in silence. Cold stone, thick walls, narrow windows that let in just enough light to remind you how dark it really is inside. If you were to walk through Tower of London today, you might hear footsteps echo across the floor. Tourists, guards, guides, telling stories that have been repeated so many times, they almost feel settled almost, because one story inside those walls has never quite rested. It begins in the year 1483. A king has just died, Edward IV. His son, Edward V, is only 12 years old, too young to rule alone. So, as was common, someone steps in to protect him, and that someone is his uncle, Richard III. At first, everything seems normal, or at least as normal as royal politics can be. The young king and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, are brought to the tower. Now, that might sound alarming to us, but at the time, it wasn't unusual. The tower wasn't just a prison. It was also a royal residence, a place where kings stayed before their coronation. So when the boys were seen walking in the courtyard, laughing even, no one thought too much of it, until they disappeared. No dramatic scene, no loud struggle, no official announcement. They were just gone. And with that silence, a mystery was born. At first, people whispered, then they speculated, then they began to suspect. Because not long after the boys vanished, something happened. Richard, their uncle, took the throne. Now, if you're thinking, that seems a little suspicious, you're not alone. People at the time thought so too. The idea that Richard III might have ordered their deaths became the most popular explanation. It was simple, clean, almost too perfect. Remove the heirs, take the crown, case closed, except it never really was, because there was no proof, no bodies, no witnesses, no confession, just a very convenient outcome, and over time, other suspects entered the picture. Some pointed to Henry VII, who would later take the throne after defeating Richard. Others suggested powerful nobles acting on their own. In truth, the story became less about facts and more about politics. Who you believed was guilty often depended on which side of history you trusted, and for centuries, that's where things stayed. A mystery built on silence, until something changed. In the 1600s, more than a century after the prince's disappeared, workers in the tower made a discovery. Bones. 2 small skeletons buried beneath a staircase. It was unsettling. Even back then, people wondered, could these be the missing princes? The remains were eventually placed in an urn and buried in Westminster Abbey, under the assumption that the mystery had been quietly solved. But here's the problem. Assumption is not proof. For a long time, that was the best anyone could do. Look at the bones. Compare the timeline. Make an educated guess. But now, we have better tools. Modern forensic science has reopened the case in ways no one in the medieval world could have imagined. Researchers have examined the remains using advanced imaging, studying bone structure, age estimates, even tiny details that hint at how these individuals lived. And then there's DNA. This is where things get complicated. In theory, DNA testing could confirm everything. Match the remains to known relatives. Give us a clear answer. But in practice, it's not so simple. Access to the remains is limited. Permissions are difficult to obtain. And even if testing is allowed, the DNA itself may be degraded after so many centuries. Still, progress is being made. Historians are also revisiting old documents, letters, accounts. Small details that were once ignored are now being reanalyzed with fresh eyes, and something interesting is happening. The story is shifting. Some modern historians argue that Richard III may not have been the villain he was made out to be, that his reputation was shaped, in part, by those who came after him, especially the Tudors. Others still believe he had both motive and opportunity. But now, there's more nuance, more uncertainty, more questions, and strangely, that might be progress. Because solving a mystery doesn't always mean finding a single, clear answer. Sometimes it means understanding the possibilities more deeply, seeing the story from multiple angles, and realizing that history is not always as certain as we want it to be. But here's what we do know. 2 boys entered the tower. They were seen for a time, and then they weren't. No farewell, no record, no trace that anyone could follow. Just absence, and that absence echoed through the centuries. It became one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in English history, a story told in books, plays, and whispered conversations, a question that refused to fade. What happened to the princes? Now, with modern science and renewed investigation, we are closer than ever to understanding the truth. Not fully there, but closer, and maybe that's fitting. Because some mysteries don't reveal themselves all at once. They unfold slowly, like a candle burning down, little by little, and as the flame flickers, shadows shift, details emerge, and the past begins to speak. In our next chapter, we leave the stone walls of the tower behind and travel across the ocean to a place where an entire colony vanished. No bodies, no battle, no clear explanation, just a single word carved into wood, Croatoan, and a mystery that feels even more impossible. Because when a few people disappear, it's strange. But when everyone disappears, it becomes something else entirely. The ocean is quiet, not silent, but steady. A slow rhythm of waves rolling in, pulling back, again and again. If you stand on the shore long enough, you start to feel it in your chest, like a heartbeat that doesn't belong to you. Now imagine that same shoreline. Centuries ago, no cities, no lights, just thick forests stretching endlessly inland, and the Atlantic stretching endlessly out. This is where our story begins. In the late 1500s, a group of English settlers arrived on a small island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They came with a purpose: to build a new life, to establish a colony in a land that, to them, was unknown and full of promise. This place would be called Roanoke Island. At first, things were difficult. Supplies were limited. Relations with local Native American tribes were tense. The environment was unfamiliar, and survival required more than just hope. So, the governor of the colony, John White, made a decision. He would sail back to England. Just for a short time, he would gather supplies, reinforcements, anything the colony needed to survive, and then he would return. Simple enough, except it didn't go as planned. Because while White was away, something much larger was happening in Europe. England was preparing for war. The threat of the Anglo-Spanish War meant that ships were needed for defense, not supply runs. White's return was delayed, not by weeks, not even by months, but by 3 years. 3 long years, and when he finally made it back to Roanoke in 1590, he expected to see signs of life. Smoke from fires, movement along the shore, familiar faces. Instead, there was nothing. No people, no bodies, no signs of struggle, just emptiness. The settlement had been carefully dismantled, buildings taken apart, structures gone. It didn't look like a rushed escape. It looked intentional, planned, almost as if the entire colony had decided to leave together. But where would they go, and why? There was only one real clue, a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. At first glance, it doesn't mean much, but to White, it did. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island. It was also the name of a local Native American group. Before he left, White had agreed with the settlers that if they ever needed to relocate, they would leave a message. And if they were in danger, they would carve a cross. There was no cross, just the word, Croatoan. So maybe, just maybe, they weren't lost. Maybe they had simply moved. But here's the problem. White never made it to Croatoan Island to confirm. Bad weather. dangerous conditions, the kind of obstacles that seem almost cruel in hindsight. He was forced to turn back, and just like that, the trail went cold. For centuries, the lost colony of Roanoke became exactly that, lost. Some believed they had been attacked, wiped out, erased. Others thought they had starved, or fallen to disease. And then there was a quieter theory, less dramatic, but more human. What if they survived? What if they joined the local tribes? For a long time, this idea was difficult for historians to prove. But now, things are changing. Archaeologists have started to uncover small but important pieces of evidence. English-style artifact stools, pottery, metal objects found not on Roanoke Island, but further inland, in areas associated with Native American communities. It's subtle, but it matters, because it suggests movement, it suggests interaction. It suggests that the settlers didn't just vanish. They relocated, and possibly adapted. There's more. Scientists have used isotope analysis on remains found in the region. This can reveal where a person spent their early years versus where they lived later in life. And in some cases, the results are surprising. Evidence of individuals who may have had European origins, living among native populations, blending in, becoming part of a different world. Even some oral history stories passed down through generations of Native American tribes mention people who arrived long ago, people who didn't look the same, who spoke differently, but who eventually became part of the community. Now, none of this is a single, definitive answer. There's no moment where someone says, yes, this is exactly what happened. But when you put the pieces together, a picture begins to form, not of a violent end, but of a transformation. A group of settlers, facing an uncertain future, choosing survival over identity, leaving behind what they knew, and stepping into something completely new. It's not the kind of story people expected. There's no dramatic final battle, no tragic discovery, just a quiet decision, repeated many times, stay, adapt, live. And in a way, that might be why the mystery lasted so long, because we were looking for the wrong kind of ending. We expected something sudden, something clear, but instead, it was gradual, subtle, almost invisible, and that makes it harder to see, but not impossible. Today, most historians lean toward this idea, that the lost colony was never truly lost. It was absorbed. Its people didn't disappear. They changed, and over time, their story blended into others, until it became impossible to separate one from the next. It's a different kind of mystery, not one of disappearance, but of quiet survival, and maybe that's more unsettling in its own way, because it reminds us that history doesn't always leave clear lines. Sometimes it fades, softly, like footprints in sand, slowly washed away by the tide. And yet, if you look closely, you can still see where they once were. In our next chapter, we move from vanishing people to a book that refuses to be understood, a manuscript filled with strange symbols, unknown plants, and a language no one could read. For centuries, it sat in silence, untouched, unsolved, until now. Or at least that's what some believe. There is a book that no one can read, not because it is lost, not because it is damaged, but because no one understands it. For over a century, this book has puzzled historians, cryptographers, linguists, basically anyone who has ever looked at it and thought, yeah, I can figure that out. they couldn't. This is the Voynich manuscript. At first glance, it doesn't look too strange. Old parchment, handwritten text, ink that is faded just enough to remind you how long it's been around. But then, you look closer. The writing isn't in Latin, or Greek, or any known medieval language. It's something else. A script made of looping, flowing characters. Consistent, structured, almost elegant. It looks like a real language, but it isn't one we recognize, and that's where things get uncomfortable. Because usually, when we find an old text, we can at least place it somewhere, identify the language family, recognize patterns. But this, nothing. It's like someone invented an entire writing system and then just left it behind. And if that wasn't strange enough, the illustrations don't help. Actually, they make things worse. Pages filled with plants that don't exist. Diagrams that look scientific, but don't quite make sense. Women bathing in green liquid, connected by strange tubes and shapes that feel almost biological. It's like a mix of a medical book, a botanical guide, and something you'd expect to see in a dream. Or maybe a very weird group project. For decades, people tried to decode it. Some of the best minds, too. During World War II, even professional codebreakers people, trained to crack enemy messages, took a shot at it. Nothing. No breakthrough. No hidden message revealed. Just more confusion. At one point, people started to wonder if it was all a joke. An elaborate hoax. A very old, very time-consuming prank. But here's the thing. The manuscript is too consistent. Too structured. The patterns in the text follow statistical rules found in real languages. Words repeat in ways that suggest grammar. There are patterns of variation that feel intentional. If it's fake, it's an incredibly sophisticated fake. And that makes things even stranger. Because if someone did create this as a hoax, why? That's a lot of effort for a joke that no one would understand for centuries. And so, the mystery remained, locked in place. Until recently, because now we have new tools. And one of the biggest game changers has been artificial intelligence. Researchers have started feeding the manuscript into machine learning systems, not to translate it directly, but to analyze patterns at a scale no human could manage. Thousands of comparisons, cross-referencing structures, looking for similarities between known languages and this unknown script. And slowly, something started to emerge. Some researchers believe the manuscript may not be completely unknown after all. Instead, it could be a heavily altered or encoded version of a real language possibly related to Hebrew or other Semitic languages. Others suggest it's a kind of shorthand, a compressed writing system where words are modified, shortened, or transformed in consistent ways. And then there's the content itself. Those strange plants. Some scholars now think they might be stylized versions of real medicinal herbs, not drawn accurately, but symbolically. The bathing figures, possibly related to medieval medical practices, treatments involving water, herbs, and the body. In other words, this might be a medical text, a guide to healing, to the human body, to natural remedies, just written in a way that hides its meaning. And that brings us to an interesting possibility. What if the manuscript was never meant to be easily read? What if it was designed to be exclusive, a way to protect knowledge, to keep it within a small group, maybe even to prevent it from being copied or misused? In the medieval world, knowledge was power, and sometimes power is hidden. But not everyone agrees with this theory. Some still believe it's a hoax. They argue that while patterns exist, they don't necessarily prove meaning, that it could be a cleverly constructed nonsense text designed to look real without actually saying anything. And honestly, that idea is a little unsettling too, because it would mean someone, hundreds of years ago, created a puzzle so convincing that we're still trying to solve it today. Either way, we're closer than we've ever been. Not to a full translation, not yet, but to understanding what the manuscript is and what it isn't. It's not random, it's not simple, and it's definitely not finished with us. Because every time we think we're close to solving it, something new appears. A new pattern, a new interpretation, a new question. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the mystery isn't just in the text. Maybe it's in the way it keeps pulling us back in, making us look closer, think harder, wonder just a little more. Because some mysteries don't want to be solved quickly. They unfold slowly, page by page, line by line, like a story that reveals itself only to those willing to stay with it. For now, the Voynich manuscript remains partially in shadow, not fully understood, but no longer completely silent. And as our tools improve, as our methods evolve, that silence is starting to break. In our next chapter, we step into a darker kind of mystery, one filled with fog, gaslight, and fear, a series of crimes that shocked a city, a name that became legend, and a question that still lingers. Who was Jack the Ripper? And more importantly, do we finally know? The fog rolls in slowly. It curls around the corners of buildings, slips through narrow streets, settles low like it belongs there. Gas lamps glow faintly through the haze, casting just enough light to see shapes but not enough to feel safe. This is Whitechapel in the late 1800s, a place where the nights feel longer than they should, where footsteps echo a little too loudly, where people keep their heads down and their doors locked because something is out there. Or rather, someone. He doesn't have a face. Not really. No one ever got a good look at him. No confirmed identity. No final arrest. Just a name. Jack the Ripper. Even now, the name carries weight. It feels less like a person and more like a shadow, a presence. But back then, it was something else entirely. It was fear, real, immediate, and growing with every passing night. It started in 1888. At first, just another crime in a city that already had too many. But then another followed, and another. The pattern began to emerge. The victims were women, most of them living in poverty, many working in conditions that made them vulnerable, and the killings, they were precise, almost clinical. There was something calculated about them, something that suggested knowledge of anatomy, perhaps, or at least familiarity. And that's when people started to realize this wasn't random. This was someone with intent, someone who knew what they were doing, and more importantly, someone who wasn't being caught. The police tried. Of course they did. They questioned witnesses, collected statements, followed leads that often went nowhere. But this was a different time. No CCTV, no DNA testing, no reliable forensic systems as we know them today. Just instincts, observations, and a growing sense of urgency. Meanwhile, the letters started arriving. Notes sent to newspapers and police, claiming to be from the killer. Some were dismissed as hoaxes. Others felt disturbingly real. One of them signed with the name that would become legend, Jack the Ripper. And just like that, the mystery had a voice, but not a face. Over time, the case became something bigger than itself. It wasn't just about solving a crime anymore. It became a story, a symbol, a puzzle that people couldn't let go of. Suspects came and went. Doctors, butchers, artists, even members of high society. At one point, it felt like anyone could be the killer, depending on which theory you believed. And that's the thing about unsolved mysteries. They invite imagination. They create space for possibilities, even wild ones. But now, we're not relying on imagination anymore. We have new tools, and one of the most talked about pieces of evidence in this case is a shawl, a simple piece of fabric, allegedly found near one of the victims. For years, it was just an object, stored away, untouched, until modern researchers decided to take a closer look. Using DNA analysis, they examined traces found on the shawl, and what they found pointed to a suspect, Aaron Kosminski, a barber, a Polish immigrant, someone who had already been considered by police at the time. According to the analysis, genetic material from the shawl matched descendants of both the victim and Kosminski. For a moment, it seemed like the mystery had finally cracked. After more than a century, a name, a real person, a possible answer. But as with many things in history, it wasn't that simple. The findings were controversial. Some experts questioned the methods used. Others pointed out that the shawl's history wasn't fully verified, meaning it might not even be connected to the crime scene. There were concerns about contamination, about how the evidence had been handled over the years. In short, the case wasn't closed, not officially. But something had changed. For the first time, there was a scientific argument, just a theory linking a specific individual to the crimes. And even if it wasn't perfect, it was a step forward. Beyond the DNA, researchers have also revisited old records, medical reports, witness statements, psychological profiles, looking at them not as isolated pieces, but as part of a larger pattern. And when they do, certain details start to align. The timing of the crimes, the locations, the behavior. It paints a picture, not a complete one, but clearer than before. And yet, there's still something about this case that resists closure. Maybe it's the lack of certainty. Maybe it's the way the story has grown over time. Because Jack the Ripper is no longer just a historical figure. He's part of culture now. Books, films, endless discussions. The mystery has taken on a life of its own, and sometimes that makes the truth harder to see. Because when a story becomes legend, it changes. Details shift. Focus moves. New layers are added, and the original question gets buried under all of it. But if we strip it back, just for a moment, we're left with something simple. A series of crimes, a city in fear, and a person who was never caught. Now, over a century later, we're closer than ever to identifying him. But we're also reminded of something important. Not all mysteries end cleanly. Not all answers feel satisfying. Sometimes we get close, but not all the way. And maybe that's part of what keeps this story alive, because uncertainty has a way of lingering. It stays in the background, quiet, unresolved, like footsteps in a foggy street, fading, but never quite gone. Still, with every new method, every new piece of analysis, we move a little closer, not just to solving the mystery, but to understanding it, And that might matter even more. Because in the end, this isn't just about who Jack the Ripper was. It's about the world he existed in. A world of inequality, of hidden lives, of stories that often went unnoticed until something terrible happened. And in uncovering the truth, we don't just name the killer. We give context to the silence that surrounded him. In our next chapter, we step away from the streets of London and into something even more devastating. A disease that changed the course of history. A pandemic that wiped out millions. And a question that lingered for centuries. What really caused the Black Death? Because the answer is not as simple as we once believed. The air feels heavy. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough that breathing doesn't feel as easy as it should. Imagine a crowded medieval street. Narrow, muddy, filled with people moving past each other, close enough to touch. Animals wandering through, waste in the gutters. The smell, let's just say it's not great. Life is happening everywhere, and then something changes. At first, it's quiet. A cough, a fever, someone too tired to get out of bed. Nothing unusual, until it is. Because the sickness doesn't stop. It spreads faster than anyone expects. Faster than anyone understands. And before long, entire households are gone. Then entire streets. Then entire cities. This is the Black Death, one of the most devastating events in human history. Between the 1300s and early 1400s, it is estimated to have killed tens of millions of people. Some say up to half of Europe's population. Half. It's almost impossible to picture. Whole communities just erased. And for centuries, people believed they knew the cause. Rats, more specifically. Fleas on rats. The story goes like this. Infected fleas bite rats. Rats carry the disease into human areas. Fleas jump to humans, and the infection spreads. Simple, clean, easy to explain. Except it might not be the full story. For a long time, this explanation was treated as fact. It made sense. It fit the pattern of outbreaks. And later cases of plague like those in the 1800s seemed to support it. But as scientists began to look closer, cracks started to appear. First, the speed. The Black Death spread incredibly fast. Faster than rat populations alone could realistically account for. In some areas, it moved like wildfire. Too fast. Then there's the seasonality. Modern plague outbreaks tend to follow certain patterns linked to climate and rodent behavior. But medieval records don't always match those patterns. Which raises a question. Was it really the same disease? Or something else entirely? For a while, alternative theories started to gain attention. Some suggested an airborne disease, something that spread through coughing and breathing, like a viral infection. Others proposed multiple diseases happening at once, a kind of perfect storm of illness. It sounds chaotic, but honestly, the medieval world was chaotic, so it wasn't a crazy idea. Then, something important happened. Science caught up. With modern DNA analysis, researchers were able to extract genetic material from the remains of plague victims, people buried in mass graves during the outbreak. And what they found was surprisingly clear. The bacteria responsible was Yersinia pestis, the same organism that causes plague today. So, case closed, right? Not exactly, because while this confirmed the what, it didn't fully explain the how. Yes, Yersinia pestis was present, but the way it spread in the 1300s still doesn't perfectly match modern outbreaks. And that's where things get interesting. Some researchers now believe that while fleas and rats did play a role, they weren't the main driver. Instead, the disease may have spread largely through human-to-human transmission, not necessarily airborne in the way we think of modern viruses, but through close contact, body fluids, contaminated clothing, even lice. Yes, lice. Not the most glamorous part of history, but possibly one of the most important. Lice live on humans. They move easily between people, especially in crowded conditions, and in medieval cities. Crowded was the default. If lice were carrying infected blood from person to person, it could explain the rapid spread. It could also explain why entire households were often affected at once. No rats required, just proximity. And that changes the picture quite a bit, because it means the disease wasn't just something people caught from their environment. It was something they caught from each other, quietly, constantly, unavoidably. There's more. Climate data has also added another layer to the mystery. Studies of tree rings and ice cores suggest that the period leading up to the Black Death was marked by environmental changes, shifts in temperature, changes in rainfall. These may have affected rodent populations in Central Asia, the region where the disease is believed to have originated. As conditions changed, infected rodents may have moved closer to human trade routes, and from there, the Silk Road did the rest. Trade ships, caravans, movement of goods and people. All of it created a network, a pathway. And once the disease entered that network, it didn't stop. But again, it's not just one factor. That's the key thing modern research keeps showing. There wasn't a single cause. There were layers. Biological, environmental, social, all interacting, all amplifying each other. And that's why it was so devastating. Because it wasn't just a disease, it was a perfect storm. People didn't understand what was happening. They turned to whatever explanations they could find. Some blamed bad air. Miasma, they called it. Others believed it was divine punishment. In some cases, fear turned into violence. Communities looked for someone to blame. And when fear takes over, reason often disappears. But now, with everything we've learned, we can see it differently. We can trace the movement, identify the organism, understand the conditions that allowed it to spread. Not perfectly, but clearly enough to piece together the story. And maybe the most surprising part is this. The mystery wasn't about what the disease was. It was about how it behaved. How it moved through a world that was deeply interconnected. Even back then. Because we often think of the medieval world as isolated, disconnected. But the spread of the Black Death tells a different story. A story of trade routes, travel, and human connection. A world that was already global, in its own way. And in that world, a single pathogen found the perfect conditions to thrive. It's a sobering thought, but also a fascinating one, because it shows how much context matters, how environment, behavior, and biology all come together to shape history, and how solving a mystery doesn't always simplify things. Sometimes, it reveals just how complex the truth really is. In our next chapter, we move away from disease and into something quieter. A burial, a ship hidden beneath the earth, filled with treasures, weapons, and clues, waiting for centuries to be uncovered, and with it, a question. Who was the man buried there, and why was he given such a remarkable farewell? The answer has only recently begun to surface, The ground looks ordinary. Just a gentle rise in the landscape. Grass moving softly in the wind. Nothing about it immediately says, there's something important here. And yet, beneath that quiet surface, was a secret, a very old one. This is Sutton who, at first glance, it doesn't seem like much. A series of low mounds, scattered across the land. For years, people walked past them without thinking twice. Maybe they assumed they were natural, or maybe they just didn't expect history to be hiding right under their feet. But in 1939, something changed. An excavation began. Careful at first, slow, methodical, and then they found it. The outline of a ship, not in water, in earth. A massive vessel, buried beneath the soil, its shape preserved, like a ghost pressed into the ground. It was unexpected, and honestly, a little eerie. Because ships are meant to sail, not to be buried. But as archaeologists continued digging, it became clear. This wasn't just any burial. This was something important, something ceremonial. Inside the ship, they began to uncover objects. At first, small things, fragments, pieces, hints, then more. Gold ornaments, intricately designed. Weapons, finely crafted. A helmet that looked almost too detailed to be real. Every item told a story, not of survival, but of status. Whoever was buried here was not ordinary. They were powerful, important enough to be sent into the afterlife with a ship full of treasure. And that raises the obvious question. Who? At the time, there was no body, or at least, no clear remains. The soil in that area is highly acidic, which means organic material like bone doesn't always survive. So instead of a skeleton, there was an absence, a space where a body once lay, outlined only by the arrangement of objects around it. It's a strange kind of evidence. You don't see the person, but you see everything that surrounded them. And sometimes, that's enough. Based on the richness of the burial, historians began to form theories. This had to be a king, or at the very least, someone very close to one. The time period pointed to the early 7th century, an era where written records were limited, where power was often regional, fragmented. But one name kept coming up, Ridwald, a king of East Anglia. A ruler known from historical texts, though not in great detail. He lived around the same time the burial was created, and importantly, he was known to have held significant power, enough to justify something like this. But it wasn't a perfect match. There were questions, doubts, because without a body, how can you be sure? For decades, the identity remained uncertain. A strong theory, but not a confirmed answer. And then, as with many of our mysteries, science stepped in. Modern techniques allowed researchers to go beyond what earlier archaeologists could do. Even without bones, the soil itself held clues, chemical traces, tiny remnants left behind by a decomposed body. By analyzing these traces, scientists could estimate things like body position, even general characteristics. It's not exact, but it adds detail. Then there's the artifacts. Each object in the burial can be studied, where it was made, what materials were used, how it was crafted. And when you compare those details with known trade routes and cultural connections, you start to build a network, a picture of influence. The items found in the Sutton Hoo burial weren't all local. Some came from far away. Byzantine coins, items with Scandinavian design influences. This wasn't just a local leader. This was someone connected to a wider world, and that aligns quite well with what we know about Ridwald, a king who had both local authority and broader influence. There's also the timeline. The burial is dated to the early 600s, and Ridwald is believed to have died around that same period. Not proof, but very convenient timing. Still, historians are careful, because history has a way of surprising us. What seems obvious isn't always correct. So instead of declaring a final answer, they weigh probabilities. And right now, the probability is leaning strongly in one direction, that the man buried in that ship was indeed Ridwald. But beyond the identity, there's something else about this burial that matters. Something bigger. Because, before this discovery, the early medieval period in England was often seen as simple, rough, less advanced. But the craftsmanship found here tells a different story. The detail in the metalwork, the complexity of the designs, the sheer scale of the burial. This wasn't a dark age. This was a sophisticated society with skilled artisans, long-distance trade, and rich cultural traditions. In other words, the past was more advanced than we gave it credit for. Again, it's almost becoming a pattern. Every time we look closer, the medieval world reveals something new, something unexpected, something that challenges what we thought we knew. And there's also something quietly human about this discovery, because at its core, this burial is about memory, about how people wanted to be remembered after they were gone. A ship filled with objects that mattered. Weapons, perhaps symbolizing strength. Gold, symbolizing wealth and power. Items from distant lands, symbolizing connection and reach. It's like a message, not written in words, but in things. A way of saying, this is who I was. And centuries later, we're still listening, still trying to understand, still piecing together a life from what was left behind. It's a different kind of mystery, not one of disappearance or violence, but of identity, of presence, of a person who left no direct record of themselves, but still managed to shape history, quietly, powerfully. And now, thanks to archaeology and modern science, we're closer than ever to knowing his name. In our next chapter, we move from kings and buried ships to something much stranger, a story that feels almost like a fairy tale. The children, appearing out of nowhere, their skin green, their language unknown, their origin a complete mystery. For centuries, people argued over whether it was real or just a story. Now, we might finally understand what really happened, and the truth is, a lot more human than it first appears. It starts like a story you're not supposed to believe, the kind told in low voices, maybe around a fire, where someone leans in and says, "This really happened," and you're not sure if you should laugh or listen more closely, because the details are strange, very strange. We are in a small village called Woolpit, a quiet place, fields stretching out in soft greens and browns, life moving at a slow, predictable pace, the kind of place where nothing unusual is supposed to happen, and then one day, something does. Two children appear. No one sees where they came from. They are just there, a boy and a girl, alone, disoriented, and immediately, people notice something is not right. Their skin has a green tint, not bright green, not glowing, but enough that it doesn't look normal. Enough that people stop, stare, whisper, because this isn't something you see every day. or ever. The children don't speak the local language. In fact, they don't seem to speak any language that anyone recognizes. Their words sound unfamiliar. Their tone is strange. It's like listening to something that almost makes sense, but doesn't. And then there's their behavior. They refuse to eat most foods. Bread, no meat, no anything offered to them. They push away, until finally, they find something they will eat. Beans, just raw beans. For a while, that's all they accept, which honestly raises even more questions. Who are these children? Where did they come from? And why are they like this? The story was recorded by medieval chroniclers, including William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, and both accounts, written independently, describe similar events, which makes it harder to dismiss as pure fiction. Because when two separate sources tell the same strange story, you start to wonder if something real happened, even if the details got a little distorted over time. According to these accounts, the children were taken in by villagers, cared for, observed. Slowly, the girl began to adapt. She learned the language, started eating normal food, and as time passed, something interesting happened. The green color of her skin began to fade. Eventually, it disappeared entirely. The boy, however, he didn't survive, which adds a quiet sadness to the story, but also a clue. Because if the green color faded, maybe it wasn't permanent. Maybe it wasn't something supernatural. Maybe it had a cause. And this is where the theories begin. At first, people came up with explanations that feel almost magical. Some believed the children were from an underground world, a hidden realm beneath the earth where everything had a greenish glow. Others thought they might be fairies, or something not entirely human, which, to be fair, fits the medieval mindset. Back then, the line between reality and folklore wasn't as strict as it is today. If something couldn't be explained, it didn't mean it wasn't real. It just meant the explanation might be unusual. But now, we look at things differently. We ask different questions, and we have better tools for finding answers. One of the most widely accepted modern explanations is surprisingly simple. The children may have been Flemish, specifically orphaned children from a group of Flemish settlers. At the time, there were communities of Flemish people living in parts of England, and during periods of conflict, some of these communities were attacked or displaced. It's possible that these children became separated from their group, lost, wandering, eventually ending up near Woolpit. That explains part of it. But what about the green skin? Well, there's a medical condition called chlorosis. It's linked to malnutrition, specifically a lack of iron, and one of its symptoms can be a pale, greenish tint to the skin. Now imagine two children, lost, scared, not eating properly, surviving on whatever they can find. Their bodies would weaken, their skin might change, and when they are finally found, they appear different. Not magical, just unwell. And what about the language? If they were Flemish, they would have spoken a dialect unfamiliar to the local villagers. To medieval ears, it might have sounded completely foreign, even unintelligible, like hearing a language you've never encountered before, and trying to make sense of it. It wouldn't, at least not at first. And the beans. That might be the simplest detail of all. If beans were one of the few foods they recognized, or had eaten regularly before, it makes sense that they would gravitate toward them, refuse everything else, stick to what felt safe, familiar. put all of that together. And suddenly, the story shifts. It's no longer about mysterious green children from another world. It's about two lost kids, hungry, confused, trying to survive, seen through the lens of a medieval community that didn't have the tools to fully understand what they were seeing. And that's important, because it shows how stories change, how real events can become something else, not intentionally, but gradually. Details get added, meanings shift. The strange parts stand out more than the ordinary ones, and over time, a human story becomes a mystery, then a legend, and eventually, something that feels almost unreal. But when we look closer, when we apply modern knowledge, we can start to peel back those layers, not to ruin the story, but to understand it better. Because honestly, the real version is just as interesting, maybe even more so. Two children dropped into a completely unfamiliar world. Different language, different customs, different expectations, and somehow, one of them adapts, learns, survives. That's not less fascinating than a fairy tale. If anything, it's more real. And maybe that's the quiet theme running through all of this. These mysteries, they don't always turn out to be supernatural, or dramatic, or impossible. Sometimes, they turn out to be human, messy, complicated, emotional, grounded in real experiences, seen through unfamiliar eyes. And when we finally understand them, we don't lose the mystery. We just change it. In our next chapter, we move from strange children and quiet villages to something much bigger, a powerful organization. Wealth, influence, secrets, and a sudden fall that shocked the medieval world. The Knights Templar. For centuries, people have asked the same question. What happened to their treasure? Was it hidden, stolen, or something else entirely? The answer might not be what people expect. There's something about lost treasure that people just can't ignore. Gold hidden in secret places, maps with missing pieces, fortunes waiting to be discovered. It's the kind of idea that feels almost too good to be true. And when it comes to medieval history, few stories have captured that imagination more than the legend of the Knights Templar. They weren't just soldiers, they were powerful, very powerful. Founded in the early 1100s, the Knights Templar began as a group dedicated to protecting Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. At least that was the official role. But over time, something changed. They grew in influence, in wealth, in reach. Kings trusted them. Nobles relied on them. Ordinary people sometimes feared them, because the Templars weren't just fighters. They were also bankers. Yes, medieval banking. It sounds strange, but it worked. Pilgrims could deposit money in one place and withdraw it in another using coded letters issued by the Templars. Safe, efficient, surprisingly modern, and with that system came wealth. A lot of it. Land, gold, properties across Europe. They became one of the richest organizations of their time, which, as history often shows, can be a dangerous position to be in, because wealth attracts attention, and power attracts enemies. Enter Philip IV of France, a king who had a problem: debt, a significant amount of it, and a large portion owed to the Templars. Now, if you're a king in that situation, you have a few options: pay it back, negotiate, or remove the people you owe. On Friday the 13th, October 1307, that last option became reality. In a coordinated move, Philip IV of France ordered the arrest of Templars across France. It was sudden, unexpected, and brutal. Members were accused of heresy, corruption, secret rituals charges that, under pressure and torture, many confessed to. Whether those confessions were real is another story. But the damage was done. The order was dismantled, its leaders imprisoned, and eventually executed, including the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. Just like that. One of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe was gone, or at least officially. Because here's where the mystery begins. When the Templars were arrested, their wealth should have been seized, catalogued, accounted for, but when authorities went looking for their treasure, much of it wasn't there. Gone. No clear record of where it went. No definitive trail, just absence. And that absence sparked something. Speculation. Stories. Legends. Some believed the treasure had been hidden, secreted away before the arrests. Others thought it had been moved, perhaps by loyal members who escaped. Ships disappearing from ports. Convoys traveling under cover of night. It all sounds very dramatic. And to be fair, some of it might be. But modern historians have taken a closer look. Not at the legends, but at the records. Financial documents, property transfers, official decrees. And what they found is a bit less mysterious, but still interesting. Much of the Templars' wealth wasn't in the form of hidden gold. It was in land, buildings, assets that couldn't just vanish overnight. When the order was dissolved, many of these holdings were transferred to another group, the Knights Hospitaller, on paper at least. So a large portion of the treasure wasn't lost. It was reassigned, redistributed, absorbed into other institutions. As for the gold and portable wealth, some of it was seized by the crown. Some likely disappeared through less official means. Confiscated, stolen, quietly redirected. And yes, it's entirely possible that some of it was hidden, but probably not in the way people imagine. No massive hoards buried in secret caves. No single legendary stash waiting to be discovered. Instead, smaller amounts, scattered, absorbed into the economy over time, which is a lot less exciting than a treasure map, but a lot more realistic. Still, the legend persists, because the idea of lost treasure is hard to let go of. It shows up everywhere. Stories of Templars fleeing to distant lands. Some say they sailed to Scotland. Others claim they reached as far as the Americas long before Columbus. There are even theories connecting them to secret societies, hidden knowledge, ancient relics. And while most of these ideas don't hold up under serious historical scrutiny, they continue to circulate because they're compelling. They turn a historical event into something larger, something mysterious, and maybe something a little magical. But when we strip it back, when we look at the evidence, the story becomes clearer. The Knights Templar didn't vanish into thin air. They were dismantled. Their wealth wasn't entirely lost. It was redistributed. Their legacy didn't disappear. It transformed. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. Because not all mysteries are about hidden things. Sometimes they're about misunderstood ones. The idea of a lost treasure is exciting, but the reality of shifting power, political motives, and economic redistribution, that's where the real story lives. And in a way, it's just as fascinating, because it shows how history works, not as a series of dramatic moments, but as a complex web of decisions, actions, and consequences. Still, it's hard not to wonder, what if just a small part of the legend is true? What if somewhere, something was hidden, a chest, a relic, a piece of history waiting to be found? Maybe not a massive fortune, but enough to keep the story alive. Because sometimes, a mystery doesn't need to be fully solved to remain powerful. It just needs a little space to exist. In our next chapter, we move away from lost wealth and into something even more unexpected. A machine, complex, precise, almost impossible for its time. Discovered in pieces at the bottom of the sea. And when researchers finally understood what it was, it changed how we see ancient and medieval technology forever. Because this device shouldn't have existed, and yet it did. Imagine diving into the crystal clear waters of the Aegean Sea in 1900. You're off the coast of a small Greek island called Antikythera, and the sun sparkles on the waves. Most of the day, it feels calm, ordinary, but beneath the surface, something extraordinary waits. Divers exploring an ancient shipwreck stumbled across fragments of a strange object. At first glance, it looked like a jumble of corroded bronze and wood. Nothing about it screamed world-changing technology. But as scientists cleaned it up, they realized they had found something utterly unprecedented. The Antikythera mechanism. To call it a device is almost an understatement. It was a machine. Tiny gears interlocking in complex patterns, dials, and inscriptions. A level of mechanical sophistication that historians believed wouldn't exist for another millennium. In other words, this wasn't just ahead of its time, it was centuries ahead. The mechanism's purpose, a kind of astronomical computer. It tracked the motions of the sun, moon, and even predicted eclipses. It could model the irregular orbit of the moon, a problem that had baffled mathematicians for generations. And it did all this with a series of bronze gears, no bigger than a few centimeters. Precision engineering, long before industrial machines existed. When researchers first studied it, they were baffled. How could the ancient Greeks create something like this? They wondered. Even our earliest mechanical clocks, created over 1,000 years later, weren't this advanced. The machine seemed impossible. For decades, only fragments survived. Scholars could make educated guesses about its function, but its full design was obscured. Then, modern technology stepped in. X-ray imaging and CT scans revealed hidden layers of gears and inscriptions. Suddenly, the picture became clearer. Every dial, every gear, every inscription began to tell a story. It wasn't just a machine. It was a teaching tool, a calendar, a calculator, a device that linked astronomy, mathematics, and mechanical ingenuity in ways we are only beginning to fully understand. And here's where it gets really interesting for medieval history. You might be thinking, wait, this is ancient Greek, not medieval. True, but the Antikythera mechanism challenges the entire timeline of technological progress. It suggests that advanced mechanical knowledge existed far earlier than previously thought, and that some of it could have been transmitted, lost, or rediscovered in the medieval world. Think about it. Medieval Europe is often painted as a dark period for technology. Castles, plagues, and knights dominate our imagination. But machines like the Antikythera mechanism reveal a more nuanced truth. Knowledge didn't vanish entirely, it survived in fragments, in manuscripts, in oral traditions, waiting for the right minds to rediscover it. In fact, Some scholars argue that the principles behind the mechanism influenced medieval clockmaking. Early mechanical clocks in European monasteries' complex, gear-driven, astronomical devices may owe a subtle debt to ancient innovations like the Antikythera mechanism. Even more striking is the implication about human creativity. It shows that complexity and ingenuity are not bound by time. People in the ancient world were capable of incredible precision and abstract thinking. They could imagine the heavens, design a machine to model them, and then execute it flawlessly, without electricity, computer chips, or modern tools. Yet the mechanism also carries a warning about how easily knowledge can be lost. For centuries, no one knew it existed. The shipwreck, the bronze fragments, the tiny inscriptions, they were all forgotten at the bottom of the sea. It's a reminder that history isn't always a straight line of progress. Sometimes brilliance vanishes, only to be rediscovered later, decades or even centuries after its creation. And that's a lesson we see again and again in our exploration of medieval mysteries. The past is full of surprises. Artifacts like the Antikythera mechanism force us to rethink what we consider possible. They remind us that the medieval world, and even earlier, was full of people experimenting, inventing, and pushing boundaries. It also challenges the narrative that medieval societies were purely agrarian, static, or intellectually stagnant. Sure, Europe faced immense challenges: disease, political turmoil, wars. But within that chaos, innovation thrived, sometimes quietly, sometimes invisibly. Imagine for a moment holding the reconstructed Antikythera mechanism in your hands. You turn the gears, align the dials. The machine clicks. The months, the planets, the moon's phases all interlock perfectly. You are touching the mind of a genius from over 2,000 years ago. And yet, because the mechanism was lost for so long, much of the medieval world may have never known that such precision was possible. It's a humbling thought, and it raises another question. What other knowledge has humanity lost? How many innovations vanished because of war, disaster, or neglect? And how many mysteries in our current world will one day be solved, only to change everything we thought we knew? As we close the story of the Antikythera mechanism, it's clear that medieval and pre-medieval societies were capable of far more than we often credit them with. Technology, mathematics, astronomy. These weren't abstract luxuries. They were part of the human drive to understand the world. And sometimes, they created machines that seem almost magical to us today. In our next chapter, we return to England, but not to a mysterious machine. Instead, we step into the life and death of a king. Not just any king, but one whose final moments were shrouded in centuries of rumor, propaganda, and legend. Richard III of England. For centuries, historians debated how he died, where he was buried, and whether his end was as dramatic as Shakespeare described. Then, in 2012, a parking lot became the stage for one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries of modern times. The skeleton of a king, beneath concrete and asphalt, waiting quietly to tell its story. It's a reminder that history isn't always where we expect it to be, and that even the most famous figures can leave secrets buried for centuries, waiting for the right eyes to uncover them. And with Richard III, we'll see just how modern science can rewrite the past, turning legend into evidence, myth into fact, and speculation into knowledge. The medieval world is full of surprises, and as we continue to peel back the layers, we find that even the most well-known stories have hidden depths, waiting for us to discover them. History loves a dramatic ending. and few endings are as dramatic or as debated as that of Richard III of England. Richard wasn't just any king. He was the last monarch of the House of York, the final piece of a bloody puzzle called the Wars of the Roses, a battle between cousins over the crown, a fight for legitimacy, power, and survival. And like many things in medieval England, it was messy. Richard came to the throne in 1483 after the death of his brother, King Edward IV, but his reign was short. 2 years later, in 1485, he faced Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field, a confrontation that would decide the future of England. According to the records in Shakespeare's vivid, though dramatized, account, Richard died heroically, fighting in the thick of battle, sword in hand, armor dented, kingly blood spilling on the battlefield. His end was poetic, cinematic, perfect for history and theater. But here's the thing. Until recently, no one could confirm exactly what happened. Where was Richard buried? What did his body look like? How did he actually die? For over 5 centuries, it was a mystery shrouded in rumor, legend, and propaganda. Some accounts suggested he was thrown into a mass grave. Others said he was buried with honor somewhere in Leicester. But the trail had gone cold. The king was gone. The truth buried beneath layers of history, myth, and misdirection. Then, in 2012, a group of researchers led by archaeologists from the University of Leicester did something extraordinary. They began to dig in an unassuming parking lot in the city center. Concrete, asphalt, not exactly the stuff of royal tombs, but history often hides in plain sight. And there it was, a skeleton, partially articulated, lying in an east-west orientation. The skull had battle injuries. The spine was curved in, unexpected detail that matched historical descriptions of Richard's scoliosis. The remains were clearly medieval, male, and unusually tall. Enough hints to excite the team. But could this really be the king? Science had its turn to shine. Modern forensic methods, including DNA analysis, came into play. Researchers tracked down living descendants of Richard's sister, comparing mitochondrial DNA. The results, a match. This was, beyond reasonable doubt, Richard III. It was a stunning confirmation. After centuries of speculation, the king had been found. Not under a castle, not in a cathedral, but beneath a parking lot. History has a sense of irony, it seems. Examining the skeleton told a story the texts couldn't fully convey. Richard had died violently, multiple injuries to the skull, sharp weapons, close combat. There were defensive wounds on his arms and legs, evidence he fought until the very end. Not a cinematic exaggeration, but a real, brutal battlefield death. Yet there were smaller details that added humanity to the story. His spine curvature, mild scoliosis, it wasn't debilitating. but it explains contemporary descriptions of Richard's appearance. The king wasn't a hunchbacked villain, as Shakespeare painted him, just a man with a slight physical difference. Enough for chroniclers to exaggerate, because medieval politics often thrived on slander and rumor. This discovery also reshaped the narrative of Richard's burial. The grave was hasty, shallow, and unceremonious. No grand tomb, no golden coffin. It suggested that the victors, Henry Tudor's forces, didn't want to honor him. And yet, the position of the body is west, with care taken in laying it to rest, hinted at some respect for his status. Not complete, not glorious, but not total disregard either. The Richard III story is a perfect example of how modern science rewrites medieval history. Archaeology, forensic anthropology, and DNA analysis combine to separate fact from propaganda, myth from reality. What we thought we knew about him, his appearance, his death, even his burial, was challenged, corrected, and expanded. It's also a reminder of the human side of history. Richard wasn't just a villain in a play or a name in a chronicle. He was a real person. He fought, he died, and his body, forgotten for centuries, still told the truth. The battlefield injuries, the hasty burial, the physical deformity, they reveal a life shaped by the brutal realities of his time. And there's a subtle but profound lesson here. History often favors the victors. Propaganda becomes accepted narrative. Legends overshadow facts. But beneath layers of story, tangible evidence persists. Bones, artifacts, DNA, they don't lie. They may be silent, but they are patient, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Richard III also demonstrates the importance of context. His scoliosis was exaggerated to paint him as a tyrant. His violent death was dramatized to justify the Tudor rise. But the remains recovered centuries later reveal nuance. A man, flawed but human, brave but vulnerable, misunderstood by both contemporaries and generations of historians. And the story doesn't end with discovery. Richard's remains were reinterred in 2015 at Leicester Cathedral, finally receiving a formal, dignified burial. A symbolic gesture returning a king to rest with honor centuries after his death. It's calming, in a strange way, to think of that. After centuries of chaos, rumor, and mystery, the king finally sleeps in peace. The bones beneath the parking lot are no longer forgotten. Science gave him a voice, and history gave him closure. This story also sets a tone for the way we approach medieval mysteries. Not every question has a dramatic, immediate answer. Some take centuries. Some require patience, technology, and collaboration across disciplines. But even the most elusive mysteries, like Richard III's death, can be resolved when curiosity meets evidence. It reminds us of something profound. History isn't static. What we know today can be challenged tomorrow. And even legendary figures, whose stories have been twisted over centuries, can have the truth quietly revealed by soil, bone, and science. And speaking of mysterious phenomena, after Richard III, we leave kings and battlefields behind and step into a world of the inexplicable. The hundreds of people danced in the streets uncontrollably, some until collapse. At first it seemed absurd, madness, perhaps divine punishment. But modern research gives us insight into why the dance went on. From the battlefield to the streets, medieval and early modern Europe is full of puzzles. Some violent, some bizarre, all revealing the complex intersection of biology, psychology, and culture. And with each discovery, the past becomes a little clearer and a little stranger. Imagine waking up one morning in Strasbourg, a bustling town in the early 16th century. Life is already hard. Markets are busy. Children run in the streets. Merchants haggle over prices. The smell of bread, horse manure, and smoke fills the air. Normal medieval chaos. Then it begins. A woman, Frau Trophia, steps into the street. She begins to dance. At first, it's gentle, almost joyful. But hours pass, and she doesn't stop. She continues to move, spinning, stomping, turning. Neighbors watch, concerned, confused, amused, even. By the next day, she's still dancing, exhausted, sweat dripping, but unable to stop. And then others join her, dozens, then hundreds, men and women alike. Streets fill with people who cannot control their bodies, moving compulsively, almost as if possessed. This is the dancing plague of 1518, one of the strangest and most perplexing events in European history. For weeks, the city became a stage for uncontrollable movement. People danced until they collapsed. Some reportedly died of heart attack, stroke, or exhaustion. At first, contemporary accounts leaned on supernatural explanations: divine punishment, possession by spirits, curse of God. The townspeople were terrified. Religious authorities weighed in. The solution: more dancing. Yes, they encouraged musicians to play. They built halls to accommodate dancers, hoping to dance it out, which of course seems absurd. Imagine thinking that adding more music would fix a mass health crisis. But this is 16th century Strasbourg. Science as we know it didn't exist. Explanations were spiritual, moral, or mystical. Modern historians and scientists, however, have pieced together a more grounded explanation. One popular theory involves food poisoning. Specifically, ergotism poisoning from ergot fungus that grows on damp rye. Ergot contains chemicals similar to LSD, which can induce hallucinations, muscle spasms, and uncontrollable movements. People in the medieval diet, heavily reliant on rye bread, could have consumed this fungus unknowingly. It's tempting to stop there. A fungal-induced dance epidemic sounds plausible and darkly poetic. But researchers caution that ergotism alone doesn't fully explain the selective nature of the outbreak. Why only certain people danced? Why were some unaffected? Why did the phenomenon appear to follow social networks rather than spread randomly? This brings in another layer: psychological and social stress. Strasbourg in 1518 was suffering famine, disease, poverty, harsh working conditions, uncertainty about the future. Life in the early modern period was tense and precarious. Under such pressure, the human mind can respond in unusual ways. Mass psychogenic illness or mass hysteria occurs when a group experiences stress-induced physical symptoms without an organic cause. Combine psychological stress with a highly suggestible social environment, and you have the perfect recipe for a dancing epidemic. People see others moving uncontrollably and mirror the behavior. It spreads almost like a contagion: emotional, neurological, social. It's human behavior interacting with social context. And in an era without scientific understanding of mental health, the results appear mystical or inexplicable. There's also the role of medieval medical theories. Physicians believed in balancing the humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Dancing fever could have been interpreted as an excess of one humor, requiring treatment. Music and movement were sometimes thought to realign bodily balance, so authorities were acting on the best understanding they had at the time, however misguided it seems now. Accounts describe scenes both tragic and bizarre. People dancing in streets and town squares, onlookers trying to coax them to stop, only for the dancers to keep going. Families pleading with authorities, doctors documenting symptoms, clergy praying and exercising. And yet, the dancing persisted. Eventually, the plague waned. Exhaustion, movement, social intervention all combined to bring it under control. But the phenomenon left a mark on history. It became a symbol of medieval life's strangeness, of the delicate boundary between physical illness, mental health, and social pressure. The dancing plague teaches us several things about medieval society. First, stress and uncertainty could manifest in extraordinary ways. People lived in precarious times. Disease, famine, and political upheaval were constant. Bodies and minds responded to stress in unpredictable ways. Second, human behavior is influenced by social observation. The dance was, in a sense, contagious, but not in the way a virus spreads. It spread because humans are empathetic and suggestible. Third, history isn't always rational. Events that baffle us may have had rational if misunderstood causes at the time. And yet, despite all the science, part of the story remains eerie. Watching hundreds of people move uncontrollably, knowing that some died from exhaustion, it's a reminder of how fragile the human body can be under psychological and environmental strain, and how culture shapes interpretation. At the time, no one understood the neurological or psychological mechanisms. They relied on explanations that fit their worldview: divine punishment, curses, or mystical afflictions. Interestingly, modern parallels exist. Mass psychogenic illness still occurs today, though under very different circumstances. Outbreaks of fainting, tics, or other involuntary movements have been documented in schools and workplaces. Social and psychological stress, combined with suggestion, continues to shape human behavior in profound ways. The medieval dancing plague, in a sense, is an extreme historical example of this phenomenon. For all its strangeness, the dancing plague is also a story of human resilience. Communities endured. They documented the events. Scholars, centuries later, analyzed them. And from chaos came understanding. What once seemed supernatural is now a complex intersection of neurology, psychology, sociology, and history. It's a perfect example of a medieval mystery solved not by magic or speculation, but by careful observation, research, and modern scientific insight. The truth is stranger than fiction, yet deeply human. People reacting to stress, their bodies betraying them in public. Social systems misinterpreting the signs, it all comes together to explain what might otherwise seem unexplainable. And the story doesn't end in Strasbourg. Across medieval Europe, other plagues of unexplained movement, behavior, and belief occurred. Some were less dramatic than mass dancing, but all reflected the same interplay of environment, culture, and human psychology. Understanding these events gives us a window into how people experienced the medieval world, not as abstract dates and wars, but as lived reality, full of fear, joy, suffering, and the occasional inexplicable event. In our next chapter, we leave public spectacles behind and move to a quieter, yet equally enigmatic puzzle. A set of coded messages known as the Beale ciphers. Though centuries later, they echo the same themes we've seen: mystery, human ingenuity, and the irresistible allure of secrets waiting to be uncovered. There's something irresistible about treasure, gold, silver, jewels, hidden somewhere, waiting for the clever or the lucky to find it. And while medieval history is full of lost riches, the story of the Beale ciphers is a little different. Strange, cryptic, and for some reason, endlessly tantalizing. The tale begins in the early 1800s in Virginia, United States. A man named Thomas J. Beale supposedly buried a treasure, gold, silver, and jewels worth millions in today's money. And he didn't just hide it, he encoded it in ciphers. 3 of them, to be exact, each supposedly containing different information. One the location of the treasure, one the contents, and one a list of names of the treasure's owners. Then, Beale disappeared, leaving behind a lockbox and his ciphers. No map, no instructions, just encoded text and a promise of unimaginable wealth. For generations, people have tried to crack the Beale ciphers. Amateur code breakers, professional cryptologists, curious adventurers, and despite hundreds of attempts, the results remain incomplete. Only one of the ciphers has been convincingly decoded using the Declaration of Independence as a key that revealed the treasure's contents: gold, silver, and jewels buried in Bedford County, Virginia. The other 2 ciphers, still a mystery. No key, no pattern, no confirmed solution. Some people swear they've made progress, only for it to collapse under scrutiny. Others claim the treasure never existed at all. Some even suspect the entire story was a hoax designed to inspire excitement or con people into chasing shadows. Part of what makes the Beale ciphers so compelling is human nature. Humans love patterns, codes, secrets. We are wired to solve puzzles, to uncover hidden meaning, to imagine ourselves as the clever ones who will finally crack the case. And the Beale ciphers are perfect for that. They offer the thrill of discovery with just enough mystery to keep people coming back for more. But beyond the psychology, there's a historical context that makes the story intriguing. The early 19th century was a period of expansion in the United States. Westward movement, gold discoveries, tales of hidden fortunes and outlaw caches were common. The Beale story fits into that larger cultural fascination with treasure, secrecy, and adventure. Modern cryptanalysts have studied the ciphers extensively. The first cipher, as mentioned, was decoded with the Declaration of Independence. It revealed the type and value of treasure: gold, silver, jewels, precise amounts. Incredible detail for a story that may have been partly fictional. The second and third ciphers, however, remain stubbornly unreadable. Some researchers argue that, if the treasure were real, the ciphers would eventually yield the location and owners. Others argue the ciphers were never meant to be solved. Perhaps they were a literary device, a story to inspire excitement and speculation. Or maybe they were a con, designed to lure curious adventurers away from other targets or simply to entertain. The persistence of the mystery says something about humans. People are willing to dedicate years, sometimes decades, chasing a story that may never have been true. Some have even sold property, taken loans, or formed treasure hunting teams, all in the hope of finding the Beale fortune. Others study the texts obsessively, poring over every letter, every pattern, every possible key, and in that obsession lies a quiet lesson. Mysteries aren't always about solving a problem. Sometimes they are about the pursuit itself. The treasure becomes secondary to the adventure, the analysis, the attempt to decode. The human mind thrives on challenge, on the idea of hidden knowledge waiting for the right person to claim it. The Beale ciphers also show how legends evolve. Over time, the story has been retold, embellished, and romanticized. Treasure maps have been drawn, books written, websites and forums created. It's a 19th century story that has persisted into the 21st century, fueled by curiosity, skepticism, and the irresistible allure of gold. Skeptics point out that there is no concrete evidence the treasure ever existed. No contemporary witnesses confirm Beale's actions. The lockbox may never have contained anything of value, and yet the allure continues. Because, in a way, that's the point. Human imagination doesn't need proof. It thrives on possibility. Even more fascinating is how the Beale ciphers intersect with technology. Today, amateur cryptographers use computers to test thousands of decoding possibilities. They apply modern algorithms, pattern recognition, and statistical analysis. Still, the two ciphers remain unsolved, which is part of their charm. They are the ultimate puzzle, simple in concept, complex in execution, tantalizing in what they promise. And while we may never find the treasure, the story is still valuable. It tells us about people's relationship with mystery, with secrecy, with human curiosity. It reflects how legends persist over centuries, shaping behavior, culture, and imagination. The Beale ciphers are a reminder that not all mysteries need resolution to have meaning. Sometimes, the chase, the speculation, and the pondering are more important than the end result. They embody the very essence of human intrigue, the desire to uncover what is hidden, the excitement of possibility, and the knowledge that some secrets may never be solved. In the broader context of our exploration of medieval and early modern mysteries, the Beale ciphers connect across time. From vanished princes to dancing plagues, from hidden treasures to cryptic messages. Humans have always been fascinated by the unknown, and with each mystery solved or unsolved, we gain insight into their world, their fears, their ingenuity, and often ourselves. So, as we leave the Beale ciphers for now, it's worth reflecting on the pattern we've seen. Mysteries, whether physical, social, or psychological, often persist because they touch something deeply human: curiosity, hope, imagination, and sometimes folly. They challenge us to look closer, think harder, and embrace uncertainty. Next, we step back into art and culture, into the world of the Renaissance, where one of the most famous faces in history waits for identification. The Mona Lisa, her smile enigmatic, her identity debated for centuries, and only recently, through documents and facial reconstructions, clarified, because even in the refined world of art, mysteries can endure, perplexing scholars and capturing the imagination of generations. And as we'll see, uncovering her identity is less about painting and more about human curiosity, record keeping, and persistence across centuries. Few images are as instantly recognizable as the Mona Lisa. That enigmatic smile, the serene background, the eyes that seem to follow you across the room. She has haunted art lovers, historians, and casual museum goers for over 500 years. But for almost as long, one question has lingered. Who is she? The painting itself is a product of the early 16th century, created by Leonardo da Vinci during the Italian Renaissance. Leonardo's notebooks reveal meticulous attention to detail, how light falls, the subtle modeling of form, the interplay of color and shadow. But as perfect as the artwork is, documentation about the sitter was sparse, and that's where the mystery begins. The traditional explanation, long accepted by scholars, is that she was Lisa Gardini, a woman from a prominent Florentine family married to a merchant named Francesco del Giocondo. This is why the painting is also sometimes called La Gioconda. On the surface, it makes sense. A merchant commissions a portrait of his wife. Leonardo paints it, and centuries later, we call her Mona Lisa. Case closed. Except, it's never been that simple. Over the centuries, various alternative theories emerged. Some scholars suggested she could have been a noblewoman, unrelated to the Giocondo family. Others thought she might have been a secret lover, a courtesan, or even Leonardo himself, painted in a female guise, a kind of self-portrait. The internet today is full of wild theories, alien models, time travelers, coded messages hidden in her smile, you name it. Some theories are entertaining, some downright ridiculous, and a few have sparked genuine academic debate. Why so much speculation? Partly because Leonardo was Leonardo. He was secretive, playful, and fascinated by human anatomy, psychology, and the nature of expression. He could have been deliberately enigmatic, leaving closure red herrings in the painting, and partly because historical record-keeping was less rigorous than we like to imagine. A few decades of missing correspondence, ambiguous mentions, and lost commissions were all it took to spark centuries of guessing. Modern scholarship, however, has begun to provide more clarity. In 2005, a researcher named Dr. Armin Schlechter rediscovered archival documents in Florence. They mentioned a woman named Lisa Gardini being commissioned by her husband, Francesco del Giocondo, for a portrait by Leonardo da Vinci. The dates and details matched the painting's timeline. Additional corroboration came from Florentine tax records and notarial documents confirming her existence and social status. Facial reconstruction techniques have also contributed. Using descriptions, contemporary portraits, and comparative analysis, historians were able to match physiognomic features to Lisa Gardini. The shape of her face, the jawline, and subtle asymmetries correspond with known depictions of women from her family and era. The technology doesn't prove identity in a court-of-law sense, but it strengthens the historical argument considerably. So, the traditional theory is largely validated. The Mona Lisa was Lisa Gardini, wife of a Florentine merchant, a woman who, through Leonardo's genius, became immortalized in paint. But why does doubt linger? Why do so many people still speculate? Partly because ambiguity sells. Stories about hidden identities, secret meanings, and mysteries thrive in culture. They invite discussion, debate and imagination. A solved mystery is less fun than one that teases, one that encourages us to ask questions rather than accept answers. And the Mona Lisa, with her subtle expression and half-smile, embodies that perfectly. There's also a human tendency to mistrust simplicity. She can't just be a merchant's wife, we say. There must be more. It's as if the mundane can't compete with the mysterious. But sometimes, the mundane is exactly what gives the story power. A real person, a real life, preserved in extraordinary artistry, is compelling enough. Leonardo's technique amplifies the mystery. The sfumato, the gradual blending of tones and edges, creates a softness and ambiguity that makes her expression so alive. It's part of why her gaze seems to follow viewers, why her smile seems to shift depending on how you look. Even knowing her identity, the effect still captivates. It's artistry transcending time, blending fact with perception. And perhaps that's the subtle charm of the Mona Lisa mystery. Unlike the Dancing Plague, the Beale ciphers, or Richard III's grave, this mystery isn't about danger, disaster, or hidden treasure. It's about identity, perception, legacy. Art allows a person to outlast time, but that same longevity invites speculation. Over centuries, curiosity grows, interpretations multiply, and the painting becomes more than a portrait, it becomes a question. Interestingly, the Mona Lisa also reflects cultural continuity. People have always been fascinated by identity and secrecy. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, portraits were not just personal, they were political, social, and symbolic. Commissioning a portrait was about asserting status, preserving memory, and conveying subtle messages. In that sense, Leonardo's painting is both personal and universal. It's a snapshot of one life, yet it invites endless interpretation. Modern imaging techniques, like infrared scanning and digital reconstruction, have also revealed hidden details, preliminary sketches, adjustments, changes in composition. Each layer shows Leonardo experimenting, refining, and shaping his vision. Even small details, the folds of her dress, the landscape behind her, the texture of her hair, contribute to the lifelike quality. And those details feed the ongoing fascination with the identity of the sitter, because every nuance feels meaningful, even if it isn't intentionally symbolic. In the end, the consensus is clear. Mona Lisa is most likely Lisa Guardini, but the cultural power of mystery endures. Her smile, her eyes, and her presence continue to invite curiosity, reminding us that even when history is clarified, some magic remains. Sometimes, knowing the answer doesn't diminish wonder, it enhances it. And as we prepare to leave the calm and contemplative world of art, we shift to something far more expansive and adventurous. The medieval world was full of exploration and movement, and the final chapter of our journey focuses on the Vikings. Who they were, how far they traveled, and how modern archaeology and carbon dating are quietly rewriting our understanding of their impact. From the enigmatic smile of a Florentine woman to the icy shores of North America, the medieval world and the mysteries it left behind continues to surprise, delight, and challenge us. When most people think of the Vikings, images of horned helmets, long ships cutting through icy waters, and fearless raiders storming coastal villages come to mind. Movies, cartoons, and TV shows have cemented this vision, but reality, far more complex and far more impressive. The Vikings weren't just raiders, they were explorers, traders, settlers, and sometimes surprisingly subtle diplomats. And thanks to modern archaeology, we're learning just how far their reach really extended. The traditional narrative of Viking expansion focused on Europe, the British Isles, France, parts of Spain, and the rivers of Eastern Europe. Textbooks emphasized pillaging monasteries, raiding villages, and leaving chaos in their wake. And while there's truth to that, they were formidable fighters. This story is only part of the picture. Vikings were also merchants, farmers, and settlers, using their longships not just for war, but for exploration and trade. Take their voyages westward. For example, the Icelandic sagas, written centuries after the events, describe voyages to new lands, Greenland, and intriguingly, a place called Vinland. For centuries, historians debated whether Vinland was myth or reality. Could the Vikings have reached North America? Modern archaeology has confirmed, yes, they did. The site at Lanso Meadows is the Smoking Gun, dated to around 1000 CE. This settlement contains remnants of Norse-style buildings, iron tools, and evidence of a small, organized community. The carbon dating is precise, artifacts match Norse designs, and the location aligns with saga descriptions. This is not legend. The Vikings reached North America centuries before Columbus, proving their navigational skills were exceptional, but it doesn't stop there. Recent discoveries suggest Viking influence may have extended even further. Archaeologists in Greenland, Iceland, and parts of Canada are uncovering subtle signs of trade. Norse-style tools found alongside indigenous artifacts, pollen studies suggesting imported plants, and isotopic analysis showing the movement of people and animals across vast distances. The Vikings weren't just raiding, they were interacting, trading, and leaving traces of their culture far from Scandinavia. The sophistication of their longships explains much of this reach. Unlike other medieval vessels, Viking ships were light, fast, and sturdy. They could sail across open ocean or navigate shallow rivers. Their construction used advanced techniques for the time, including overlapping planks, clinker-built, and flexible hulls that allowed them to handle rough seas. These ships were technological marvels, sometimes more advanced than contemporaneous European vessels, and they were essential for exploration, trade, and yes, occasional raiding. Vikings were also adept at navigation. Without compasses, they relied on sunstones, stars, ocean currents, and landmarks. Recent studies show they may have used polarized light patterns in the sky, something even modern navigators struggle with. It wasn't guesswork. It was skill, observation, and deep understanding of the natural world. One of the most interesting aspects of Viking exploration is how it challenges the notion of the medieval world as small or isolated. The idea that Europe was insular until the Age of Discovery is too simplistic. Viking voyages remind us that medieval people traveled, explored, and connected regions in ways previously thought impossible. From the icy fjords of Norway to the Atlantic coast of Newfoundland, the Vikings demonstrate that the medieval world was vast, dynamic, and interconnected. Yet, like many medieval stories, the Viking narrative has been shaped by myth and exaggeration. Popular culture emphasizes bloodthirsty raiders, often ignoring their roles as settlers and traders. Historical records are sparse and biased. Monks wrote about them as violent invaders, which they were, but only partially. Archaeological evidence allows us to balance these perspectives, showing both violence and ingenuity, destruction and settlement. The Vikings also left enduring legacies. Place names across the British Isles like by in Yorkshire towns reflect Norse origins. Genetic studies show Viking ancestry spread far beyond Scandinavia. Even linguistic traces remain, in words adopted into English and other languages. This isn't just history in books, it's living evidence of their reach. Modern science continues to expand our understanding. Carbon dating, isotopic analysis, and remote sensing reveal settlement patterns, diet, and even travel routes. Ship reconstructions and experimental voyages test theories about navigation, endurance, and seafaring technology. Every discovery adds nuance. Vikings were not just raiders. They were skilled, adaptable, and far more connected to the wider world than most textbooks admit. The story of the Vikings fits perfectly into our larger exploration of medieval mysteries solved. Like the Antikythera mechanism or the dancing plague, their history challenges assumptions. It overturns stereotypes, confirms legends in part, and shows that the medieval world was more complex and connected than we often imagine. Their voyages remind us of human curiosity, ambition, and adaptability. Facing unknown seas, harsh climates, and distant lands, the Vikings ventured far from home not just for conquest, but for trade, settlement, and survival. It's a testament to the same human traits we've seen in other medieval mysteries: ingenuity, resilience, and the drive to understand the world. And while we have uncovered a lot, there are still questions. How many other Viking sites remain undiscovered? Did they reach deeper into the Americas than we realize? What cultural exchanges occurred with indigenous populations? Each new discovery hints at more complexity, more connections, and more stories waiting to be told. So as we close this chapter, the Vikings serve as a final reminder of the medieval world's vastness and ingenuity. From North America to Greenland, from fjords to rivers, they show us that history is not static. It is living, expanding, and constantly reshaped by new evidence. The medieval world, often dismissed as dark or stagnant, was in fact full of movement, curiosity, and adventure. And with that, we reach the end of our journey. We've uncovered hidden kings, dancing epidemics, lost treasures, mysterious manuscripts, and far-reaching explorers. The medieval world, once thought opaque and unknowable, is gradually revealing its secrets. Science, archaeology, and careful historical analysis allow us to solve mysteries that confounded people for centuries. Yet, there is a gentle truth in all this. Not every mystery will ever be fully solved. Some secrets are meant to remain, tantalizing us, sparking curiosity, and reminding us that history is alive. It is a tapestry of human experience, woven from evidence, myth, and imagination. And sometimes, the joy isn't in knowing everything, it's in the act of discovery itself. As you lay down to rest, remember this: the past is full of mysteries, waiting for patient eyes, curious minds, and careful hands to uncover them. And while some will be solved, others will linger, whispering stories of human ingenuity, folly, and the enduring power of curiosity. History is never truly finished, and that's exactly what makes it magical. And just like that, some of history's oldest mysteries are no longer mysteries at all. It's amazing to think that after hundreds of years, we're still uncovering new clues that reshape what we thought we knew about the medieval world. And who knows, there may still be countless secrets waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like the video. Really helps the channel grow. And if you're new here, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another fascinating story. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Which of these mysteries surprised you the most? Or is there another historical mystery you'd like us to explore next? Let me know down in the comments. And if you're not ready to leave just yet, check out one of the other videos on your screen for more calm and intriguing history content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.